This is real footage of the surface of Venus, mapped by radar. A spacecraft might not land there again until 2036. 51 years since the last one ever did. And this year, the United States government tried, for the second time, to cancel every mission that might get there sooner. So for now, 10 fragile machines from the 1970s and 80s remain the only proof anyone has ever collected from the ground of that planet. And on one of them, a real Soviet scientist once looked at the photographs and claimed something in them was alive. This is the full story. The machines, the photographs, the claim, and the fight happening right now over whether anyone ever goes back. You're watching Mindwired. This is the story of Venera, the only photographs ever taken from the surface of Venus and the machines that died to get them. Chapter 1. The machines built to die. February 12, 1961, the Soviets launched Venera-1, the first spacecraft in history to attempt a flight to another planet. 1 week later, contact is lost. It sails past Venus in total silence. 1965, Venera-3 carries medallions bearing the Soviet coat of arms toward Venus and becomes the first human object to ever strike the surface of another planet. It, too, is already silent when it hits. That same year, Soviet leadership takes the planetary program away from the legendary designer Sergei Korolev and hands it to a rival bureau. Their first move is to run the old landers through a centrifuge. Every single one fails at half the force it was rated to survive. Nobody yet knows why. Soviet engineers believe Venus's surface pressure is no more than 10 atmospheres. Venera-4 is built for 18, just in case. It is not nearly enough. Days after Venera-4 enters the atmosphere and is crushed roughly 25 kilometers up, higher than airliners fly, an American probe flies past and measures the real number, somewhere between 75 and 100 atmospheres. The estimate had been off by a factor of 10. Venera-5 and 6 are reinforced to 25 atmospheres, still nowhere close. So the engineers do something colder and smarter. They shrink the parachutes on purpose, so the capsules fall faster and reach crush depth before their batteries run out. If it's going to die anyway, it dies with the tape still running. Venera-7, 1970, is the answer to everything learned so far. A titanium capsule built for 180 atmospheres and temperatures past 500 degrees, pre-chilled to 8 below zero before it even enters the atmosphere. December 15th, 1970. Its parachute tears apart on the way down. The probe free falls, hits the surface hard, and comes to rest, tipped over on its side, its antenna pointed at nothing. Mission Control hears silence. Days later, by some accounts weeks, a radio astronomer named Oleg Zhiga sits down and replays the recorded tapes anyway. Buried in the noise, he finds it. Roughly 23 more minutes of signal at about 1% of normal strength. It is the first transmission ever received from the surface of another planet. The probe measures about 475 degrees. It cannot even measure the pressure directly. A stuck sensor means engineers have to calculate it from the heat alone. Venera-8, 1972, finally lasts long enough to matter. 50 minutes on the surface, and its light sensors report something unexpected. It is bright down there. Bright enough, Soviet scientists say, to compare it to an overcast day in Moscow. Bright enough, maybe, to finally take a picture. One footnote first. Venera-8 had a twin that never even left Earth orbit. It fell back down on its own in May of 2025. 53 years later, a machine built to survive Venus finally, quietly, came home. Chapter 2. The first pictures. Venera 9 and 10 are built differently. A spherical pressure shell to protect the electronics, a crush ring to absorb the landing, a wide disc that looks like an antenna, but is really just a brake against the thick air, built to survive on the surface for at least 30 minutes. October 22nd, 1975. Venera 9 lands, and about 2 minutes later, its camera switches on. It is the first photograph ever taken from the surface of another planet. Not a flyby picture. The actual ground. Except it isn't really a photograph. It is a half-hour mechanical scan, built one line at a time by a nodding mirror. And one of its two lens caps refuses to eject. So instead of a full circle, engineers get a single strip, 180 degrees wide. What comes back surprises everyone. Sharp, angular, uneroded rocks. Many scientists had braced for a smooth, dust-choked, ancient-looking world. Instead, this looks young, active, recently disturbed. 53 minutes after landing, the signal stops. Not because the lander died, because the relay satellite overhead finally drifted out of range. The probe's voice may have kept going. Nobody was left close enough to hear it. 3 days later, Venera-10 lands 2,200 kilometers away. The exact same failure happens again. One lens cap won't eject, but the view is completely different this time. Flat, smooth, a weathered plain instead of broken rock. And the floodlights both landers carried, built because engineers feared total darkness down there, turn out to be unnecessary. It is bright enough already. As bright, one Soviet account says, as Moscow under an overcast sky. 3 years later, Venera 11 and 12 land with upgraded color cameras. On both landers, every single lens cap fails to eject. 0 images. 2 of the most advanced cameras ever sent to another planet, and neither one ever opens its eyes. Chapter 3. The record that still stands. March 1st, 1982. Venera 13 lands. Engineers have braced for a mission far shorter than what actually happens. The lander keeps transmitting for at least 127 minutes. To this day, no machine has ever survived longer on the surface of Venus. This time, every lens cap ejects cleanly on both cameras, and these cameras see in color. For the first time, humanity has a color photograph of another planet's ground. The sky in that photograph is orange. That is not a filter, and it is not decay in the film. Only about 2.5% of sunlight makes it through Venus's atmosphere at all, and what survives has had almost all the blue stripped out of it. The orange is real. Venera 13 also drills into the ground, runs a chemical analysis of the rock, and its microphone captures the wind, the sound of its own landing, the pop of a lens cap firing loose, and the drill grinding into Venusian soil. The first sounds ever recorded on the surface of another planet. 4 days later, its twin, Venera 14, lands 950 kilometers away and immediately produces the finest irony in the entire program. Its ejected lens cap comes to rest in the exact spot its own probe arm is about to strike to measure how compressible the soil is. Instead, it perfectly measures the compressibility of its own lens cap. One more correction, while we're being honest. That famous audio clip of Venus you may have heard online, the wind and the static. That's not actually Venera 13. It's the recording from its twin, Venera 14. And here's the honest limit of all these images. Up close, the cameras could resolve detail down to about 4 millimeters. Just a meter or two away, resolution collapses to a handful of pixels, which matters because of what happens next. Chapter 4. The Claim. 2012. 30 years after the landing, a scientist at Russia's Space Research Institute goes back through the Venera 13 images. His name is Leonid Xanfomality, and he is not a fringe figure. His instruments flew on 4 separate Venera missions. He is a genuine veteran of this exact program. In a peer-reviewed paper, he describes several objects in the frames. A disk, about 1/3 of a meter across, that appears to change shape between scans. A dark shape near the lander's own measuring arm that vanishes after several minutes. And an object he calls, in his own words, a scorpion. He proposes they may be signs of life. Other scientists go back to the same images. The disk, they find, is simply the lander's own 2 ejected lens caps. One camera saw one, the second camera saw the other. Neither one ever moved. The scorpion, researchers find, only exists in degraded, recopied versions of the images. Look at the original telemetry data, and it isn't there at all. It's processing noise, amplified by generations of copying. One planetary scientist walked through the claim piece by piece, pointing to sharpening filters, gaps filled in by guesswork, and simple differences in radiostatic between 2 separate transmissions of the same scene. Her verdict, less convincing, she wrote, than a Bigfoot photo taken on Mars. No other research team has ever reproduced the finding or endorsed it in the years since. Xanthomality died in 2019. His claim remains published, attributed, fully explained, and never once confirmed. The head of his own institute, asked about it afterward, didn't dismiss it outright either. Russian scientists, he said, hope to test the idea on a future mission. Nothing special will be needed for that, he added. Just good television. Chapter 5. The fight happening right now. Last year, the Bank of Russia minted a silver coin marking 50 years since the first photographs from Venus's surface. It's a lovely coin. It also marks something quieter. Nobody has taken a new one since. Right now, exactly one funded mission anywhere in the world is built to put a camera back through those clouds. NASA's Da Vinci would drop a probe with a window built into its hull, aiming to photograph a highland region called Alpha Regio in far sharper detail than Venera ever managed. In 2025, the United States government proposed cancelling it entirely, along with almost every other Venus mission NASA had planned. Months later, Congress wrote the Venus missions back into the budget by name. In April of 2026, the government tried again. A new budget request once more eliminates Da Vinci, eliminates its sister mission Veritas, and eliminates America's own contribution to Europe's Venus orbiter. As of today, that fight is still unresolved in Congress. No final decision has been made either way. Even if Europe's orbiter survives untouched, it only maps Venus from orbit. No camera on it ever touches the surface. Russia's own return mission, the closest thing to a real successor, has already slipped to 2036 at the earliest. And by Russia's own scientists' account, even that date isn't firm. The nearest thing to a mission actually in progress is privately funded, built by a small American company, and carries a single instrument with no camera at all. It's currently waiting on a rocket that has never once left the ground. Which means, under every plan that currently exists, the photographs a handful of Soviet machines took in 1975 and 1982 may remain the only ones humanity has for another decade, possibly longer. Here's what stays with me. A machine engineer is expected to survive half an hour lasted over 2, on a planet hot enough to melt lead, at 90 times the pressure that surrounds you right now. And half a century later, the machine still holding the record for it is more reliable than the budget lines meant to send its replacement. Somewhere in an archive, the original data from those few frozen minutes still exists. Everything else you've ever seen of Venus's surface is just a copy of that. If a machine built to die on Venus got to you, wait until you see the man frozen for 5,300 years, and the things scientists just found still alive on him. That full story is on this channel right now. Subscribe to Mindwired. If any of this messed with your head a little, well, that's exactly the point. And it only happens because people like you keep showing up. And
hit subscribe right now for it. It costs you nothing, and it's the entire reason Mindwired keeps making videos like this. Subscribe.